There's no better place to be than on this beautiful Friday evening, sitting on your lounges there, wherever you are on the face of the world. Welcome one, welcome all. We are on your program Sankofa, where we are discussing the greater issues of Africa. And as we promised you, we are bringing you the thought leaders, we're bringing you the professional people, the politicians, the academicians, the economists, the educationalists, and all the other people in their various lines of professional opinions. And they come on the show so that we can sharpen our conversation as Africans. And today in particular, we are very much blessed to welcome in the house in a big way Dr. SENOKOANE, Tim SENOKOANE. Again, from the University of Pretoria. He holds a PhD in philosophy and theology. In particular interest is soteriology. He reminds me of my old days when I was in school there, studying all the ologies, eschatologies, theology, pneumatology, Christology and anthropology, and all the ologies that go there. And we are so excited to have you on the program with us, as we will be having a conversation around the greater African issues on your program, Sankofa. We're looking back at the issues of salvation and land, modern issues, and again, as we thrust into the future. So feel free to introduce to us, who is Dr. Tim SENOKOANE? Who's our guy? Where does he come from? How does he end up here on my hot seat today?
No, thank you very much. Let me greet everyone, including yourself as a host. I was born from a small township in the Free State called Hertzogville. Hertzogville. It was named after J.B.M. Hertzog.
Okay.
The architect. Yes, the architect of apartheid, J.B.M. Hertzogville.
Okay.
Then I moved to Orange Farm. That's where I matriculated, and later went to study in Tefloop. Then stayed in Pretoria to finish my degrees. Then I stayed there, and eventually was hired as a lecturer at the University of South Africa in theology. Mm-hmm. Then I graduated with my PhD there, my doctoral studies. I did my master's degree at Kampen Theological University in the Netherlands. Then up until then I became a professor at UNISA, the same university that is my alma mater.
So he's professor now?
I'm a professor now.
My Lord, yes. Professing knowledge in the corridors of power. Yes. Sitting with Professor Tim here.
No,
beautiful.
Actually, my name is TUMI. Yes, it comes from my full name is Buitumelo. Other people call me Bibi because those are my initials.
Okay. Yes. Bibi TUMI SENOKOANE.
Yes, correct.
All right.
Bishop.
Whew. Now that's quite an illustrious introduction. Quickly, in the academia, in the space of learning, just in brief, just take us through what sort of mind frame. I mean, because once you become a professor, you can look on this thing from an eagle's view, and you're no longer looking from the bottom of the chain, looking up. We're actually looking up to you guys to say, restructure this thing for us. When you look at this format of African education, in all frames, if you had a chance of rewiring this thing, what do you think is missing in our educational processes to produce the quality of the student and who becomes a professional, who can impact and change the terrain of African mindsets?
Look, there are multiple dimensions on how we can approach this. One of them is to attempt to instill what we call African worldview into the world of an ordinary African child, later who become a student. We need to instill that worldview because worldview frames how we think and how we do things or what we become. For an example, if one is born in a particular family, that family worldview influences how one thinks or behaves. Also, the neighbors will contribute into that, eventually the society at large, being it through churches or other institutions. But later, you are formed by those different experiences that one interacts with. And as an African person, education should be influenced by those experiences that we were born into, lived into, grew into. Okay. And I think the education that we came to meet somewhere in our life at a later stage has not given or afforded that opportunity to interact our experience with knowledge itself. So I think more or less that's where we are lacking as academia or as institution of higher learning or even basic education itself, because what I've realized is that from the preschool or the crèche itself, there are no foundations in as far as learning is concerned, African content is concerned, because we've been influenced more or less by Western societies, their epistemologies, and eventually we grow to become what we have
decided.
For
someone who has not had an opportunity of sitting around in the corridors of professorship at that level, maybe can you just introduce us to, it's a big word, worldview. I hear you. Maybe just give us a few frames of what are these worldviews, just from a high level, not necessarily in too much meat, but just quickly, so that when someone is supposed to be studying, someone who is sitting at home there, they think that they're educated, they think that they have a profession. Meanwhile, they're just looking at the world maybe through one frame. What are the various, maybe you can just identify for us, the worldviews that are impacting the quality of training and education that is going through our modern students in the 21st century?
Look, culture can be one of such, because culture gives us a certain view about life itself, how we interact, how we experience human being, how we experience the society. But even media itself brings a certain worldview. History itself can bring a different worldview. Economics itself can bring a different worldview. But as one understands and knows, in Africa, we believe that as epistemology of Africa, we should be influenced by a holistic approach, meaning whatever the views that you have must not only be influenced by economics, because the risk of being influenced only by economics, it means therefore you neglect the component of religion, you neglect the economy, you neglect the history, and you neglect knowledge itself, because you think that one view dominates or dictates others. But once you come to a realization that all the views, what you experience in the world that you are given or born into, those different experiences must come together, mesh together, and try to find meaning in synergy amongst all those views that you find existing in your space.
Wow, okay, interesting. And I would my feet are itching to give you the first, maybe the really good, maybe 3-4 minutes there. Take us through the theology of land, according to you, in the past. If the first part would be your historical understanding of land and theology. What would you call is the theology of land, and how does that interact with the African's identity and his relationship with his land?
I think my point of departure would be
pre-colonial question.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think obviously one will understand that the land, in as far as an African is concerned, was communal. Communal meaning it was owned by the society or the community. Obviously the king became the custodian on behalf of the society. But then, that was the arrangement, because we should not move away from the fact that there's always been leadership even in Africa. And it has its own rules, its own customs on how land should be managed by the kings themselves. Obviously being guided by the men and women who were in that land, or leaders of that land, if one has to use that. But what we need to understand is that in that ownership, by a communal ownership, in those rules, obviously later we have found that through historical means that then land was taken away from Africans. But what is important is to understand the philosophy of the land. Is that, Prof. Takatso Mofokeng, in one of his articles, talks about land as our mother. Meaning, in short, land gives birth to ourselves as human beings. Land gives not only birth to human beings, but also including the minerals and raw material that is found within land. Even crops themselves are given birth by the land itself. So that's where we must start, to understand that we look after the land, we must pride ourselves within the land or by the land, because land is our mother, we are giving birth. And you will understand that where your mother is concerned, there must always be pride. You need to defend. You must fight for your mother. You must.
You
claim
don't swear my.
it's your identity.
You don't swear, and you
No.
mentioned my mother.
Anyway, it's your identity.
Yeah.
I always tell people, for an example, when Gaddafi was killed, Gaddafi was in Tripoli as the capital city of
Libya.
in Libya. But what happened was that when NATO attacked, what happened is that he ran to his home of birth in Sirte. He ran. He ran from the capital city where military was, where everything was situated, where his generals was. But he ran to this place of his birth because he could connect, he could feel protected at the land of his birth. So that's the connection that an ordinary African has with land. And later, because of the colonization era, later apartheid, what we've seen is that through the dislodging of an African person, therefore that connection with land was taken away.
Was removed.
An African, for an example, understood that relationship, that umbilical cord between the land and an African person. Unfortunately, the umbilical cord was taken away.
It was cut.
It was cut. Therefore, it is for that reason that even today, some of us, this generation, do not have that relationship with the land and do not understand that relationship with the land. And do not even have pride about the land.
About land. On the same note, since you are a theologian, take me through the biblical understanding as to how can a God in heaven give land belonging to one nation to another nation as their inheritance, when the battles of which have not stopped to date between the Palestinians and the Israelis, fighting over the pieces of land. Hence my question, what is your understanding, the theological, theophilosophical, economic understanding of what is the theology of land according to the Bible?
Look, I think it's very important to understand hermeneutics when you come to reading of the Bible and its interpretation. It's very important. And my approach has always been more or less 50%, 60% with the views of Kanan Banan. Kanan Banan's view on the Bible is very simple. He says that if needs
that's my ex-president, Kenan Banana, in Zimbabwe.
He says if needs be, Africans will have to rewrite the Bible. If you find that in the Bible, there are stories of conquest or stories of wrongdoing, being it a matter of taking land by force, being it a matter of women being raped in the Bible, Kanan Banan says that Africans, women, should have the opportunity and possibility to rewrite the Bible. And I think that's fundamental.
You can have a new narrative.
Yes, we need new narratives because some of the dominant narratives in the Bible are the ones that are used, patriarchal, are the ones that are used to exclude and exploit other people in the process. So I think more or less I align with the view of Kanan Banan, but more so also with the views of black theology that says that we need to develop a hermeneutics of suspicion. We must never take the Bible as is. We must, every time when we read the text, we must read it with suspicion.
Hold it right there. The Professor Tim SENOKOANE is in the house taking us through the concept that we must be suspicious. Every time you're reading text, we'll be back with you just after the break as we further on look into the salvation of land and how Africans can save themselves from poverty and etc. using the tools of theology.